Vacuuming is kind of boring and it hurts my legs when I stand up for too long, which is exactly why I decided to create this remote control vacuum so I can have fun and clean at the exact same time, and I don't even need to be standing up. The RC robot that I built has different speeds as well. Just for the click of a few buttons I can make the fan spin, the wheels move different directions, and even have an autonomous mode. And before we get to the actual test to see how well this works, we first have to look at the design process. And so I first wrote down the problem statement. The problem statement says, vacuuming normally hurts your legs because you need to stand up to vacuum usually. And this is a big problem for a lot of people. Some people do like to stand up, have exercise, but sometimes your leg can already be hurting. That could cause problems when actually vacuuming. And then I did the research, and from the research I found this. If I simply attach a vacuum to the RC car, this would just make the car overall more bulky and less customizable and harder to make autonomous. Some autonomous robots like Roomba and Groovy exist, but they are way too expensive for my budget. And the requirements for this RC mini vacuum is 1, it must be fun to use, 2, it must have an autonomous mode, and 3, it should be pretty good at cleaning. And for the brainstorming sketches, I first started making a block type robot and then attaching the vacuum to the front, and then of course adding the wheels to the side, and then on the inside of the vacuum, a little space where all the dust and scraps would go. I wanted to add a filter before and after the motor, and then I made the schematic. I made one schematic, but then I remade it because I had added up the amperage incorrectly. So the second one was better, and I was able to see how much amperage I would have to spare, which ended up being 2.1825 amperage. And this only included the motors, but the motors are the ones that require the most amperage, so any other little component would not do much difference. And once I was finished with that, I started doing the wiring for the motors. I started attaching them to the motor controller, just making sure I had the circuit on correctly, so I can then attach it to the actual body of the car. Once I had finished wiring up those motors, I just ran a simple code to make them run so I could make sure they were all plugged in correctly. This will assure me that in the future I will not have any problems using these motors. And once I had finished and made sure the motors worked pretty well, I then made the body and added the fan motor, and then I attached the wheels, and this is how it ended up looking. It looked pretty good, and this is when I found out what gauges were. There is a reason why gauges exist, and these Arduino wires are only 28 gauge, meaning they can safely handle from 0.4 to 1 amp, and so using them for the long term was not a good idea. I had to replace them because these wires could melt under that much amperage, and it could cause a short circuit and damage my battery or other components. So of course, once I had realized this mistake I've made, I immediately paused my project here and looked at other areas that needed lower gauge wires as well. And during the build process, I had made a huge mess around the area, so I had to do a quick cleaning session because a clean workspace is a safe workplace. And so I found this heat gun and I saw that it was going to be very, very good for the wire connections. And then I wanted to find some connectors, and I found some, and I went to go buy them. And then I found another wires, and then I decided to go buy it as well. And when the stuff finally came, I simply put down all the stuff. I looked at the heat gun, I saw it was good, and then I opened up the packages for the battery connectors, but unfortunately I had gotten ones that were too big, so I had to go replace it. But I ended up getting these other connectors that actually worked pretty well. But this is when my project stopped because obviously I had to wait a while for my stuff to get here, and I just wanted to upload a video already, so I moved on to a different project. This is when I made the headphones with the ultrasonic sensor so I could detect stuff around me. And so I ended up taking stuff and wires and the Arduino from the robot, and then I also had another video, the plant video, where I made a plant feeder that used ultrasonic sensor. I also took some stuff from there, more wires. I also ended up taking one of the motors from the car, and that is why it's missing a wheel and a bunch of stuff. A motor controller as well because I wanted to use that motor. Had to restart from the half point, and so then I just started by taping the bottom so it could be more secure. And once I finished that, I ended up adding the wheels back. I ended up soldering the batteries to the motor controller so the battery can give the direct 12 volts to the motors, and so the buck converter can convert the 12 volts to 6 volts so it could power the fan motor and the Arduino. I also ended up wiring the motors, and then I finished the wiring for the fan motor as well, and then I just tested if the motors spinned, and of course they did. And then this little box where the actual vacuum is, there was a little opening in the back, so I decided to put some tape on it to secure it so that no air could escape. And then I tested everything. The fan worked, the wheels worked, and then when I was testing the vacuum, I noticed that the vacuum was pretty weak, so I ended up removing this paper filter that I had put before, and sure enough, when I had removed it and added a new tip to the tube, it ended up sucking up up the paper scraps pretty well, so I was pretty proud of it. And once I was finished with that, I went on and added a filter to the outside of the vacuum so that no dust, no scraps could get out of the vacuum. And I ended up adding some holes to it so there could be a way for the air to exit. And then this was the finished car. It looked pretty good. This is the top view. And even though there's a lot of wires everywhere, I didn't really want to spend a lot of time figuring out how to hide the wires. And once I finished with the build, of course, I went on to do the program. The program is right here. I'll show a video of me scrolling down. And yeah, that's basically what it was. That's basically the program that I used. And then I did add an autonomous mode as well. The autonomous mode, what it would do, it just go basically in a square, and slowly the square gets smaller and smaller, so it vacuums a smaller and smaller area every single time until there's no more space, and that's when the autonomous stops. So it's not really a crazy autonomous, but at least it's something. And so moving on to the first test to see how well this robot works, I put some scraps on the ground. I turned on the fan and moved the car forward, and you can see it sucked up the scraps pretty well. And then when I emptied it out, a good amount of scraps came out, and of course there were some scraps left, so I went back after I had dumped out the scraps and went for round 2, and not much scraps got lifted from this one, and only a little bit of scraps were in the vacuum, so I hadn't done much. But now that I had seen that I can somewhat pick up scraps, it was now time for the test for the autonomous mode, and I had put some scraps on the carpet, and then I ran the autonomous mode. It went around. It barely ended up picking up anything, and so to get a better view if it actually did pick up anything, I ended up ripping open the filter so I could take a good look inside, and there was a little bit of scraps in there, so it did pick up some stuff, or maybe it was from the other previous test that I did. But anyway, I did go back and I went back to tweak the code because the turns were not a perfect 90-degree angle, so I tried to make the turns a bit longer so that it could be closer to that 90 degrees. And for this second round, I think it was better, but of course I tried to clean it up and it didn't really work that well again, so then I ended up switching it to teleop so I could try to pick up the remaining scraps. It didn't end up working that well either, but anyway, this was the before and this is the after, so of course there was a difference to how much scraps were left. So of course it did work a little bit, but obviously it's not perfect. The vacuum was powered by a 6-volt motor, so it's not really gonna work that well, but at least it did end up picking up some scraps, which is pretty nice. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any ideas of what else I should build, let me know in the comments, and yeah.